this is who we are. 'Cause this is who we are.
We love you. And all God's people said, amen. Hey, what do we talk about? When I sing it, y'all got to sing. I said, amen. Come on now. Come on now. Amen. Amen. Stop. Y'all just too much sometimes. All right, Daniel 6. That's on page, whatever Bible Daniel 6 has in your Bible, okay? So that's the page number. Find it in there. It's after the book of Genesis at some point and before the book of Revelation, so it's in there. It's hard to find, actually. So if you need help, turn to your neighbor and say, help, please. Daniel 6, here we go. It's going to be up on the screen, so if you don't have your Bible, no worries. We still love you, but bring a Bible. If you need a Bible, let us know. We'll give you a Bible. Yeah, holla for that. All right. Daniel 6, here we go. I'm just going to ask whoever's running to follow along because I'm not going to be clicking these. All right. Okay, I'm going to hold this. I like, the bigger the Bible, the more holy. That's not true. All right. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps. Stop. I had to Google that because I was like, what does that mean? Bible always saying confusing words. And listen, I don't care if you've been a pastor for 400 years or if Christianity is brand new or if you don't believe it. Some of these words don't make any sense because it's 2019. You know what I'm saying? So I was like, Siri, what's satrap? And the person was like, study theology more, Phil. And I was like, Siri, stop. You can't say that. And it basically means governors. I Googled it. So I'm just going to say governors because it's 2019. Here we go. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 governors to rule throughout the kingdom with 3 administrators over them, one whom was Daniel, our boy Daniel. The governors were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the governors by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the governors tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Pay attention to that. So these administrators and governors went as a group to the king and said, may King Darius live forever, suck-ups. The royal administrators, prefects, governors, advisors, and governors, okay, that's ironic, have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree into writing. He just was like, I like that. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? These dudes are just straight savage, manipulating this whole situation, getting Daniel in trouble. Some of y'all be like that. The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who was one of the exiles from Judah. So that brings us back to chapter 1, right? At this point, he's still like an exile. He's still a captive. Keep that in mind. Where am I at? Daniel, la 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 la. Now I lost my place, guys. Stop. Okay. Oh, yeah. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. Then the king said to Daniel, may your God, who you serve continually, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. And does that sound familiar? Bob will be working. And the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" And Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. So at the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. That's savage, by the way, that last sentence there. I don't like reading that last sentence. The kids didn't deserve it. They were wild back then. So things I think we can pull out. That's a lot of scripture. I'm not just going to let y'all sit on that and be like, Phil, that was 24 verses and took 8 minutes. The Bible's really cool, though, which is why we read it. But we are going to break it down a little bit so that hopefully it's a little more tangible, that you can understand what Daniel did here and how it applies to us and how we can boldly follow God and not the culture. So the first part's going to come out of verses 4 and 5. I'm going to read them to you. It says, "At this, the administrators and the governors tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, 'We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God.'" First point that we can learn here from Daniel is this: holiness brings haters. We're going to break this down a little bit. Holiness brings haters. Real quickly, I'm going to give you kind of just a working definition of holiness. What does that mean? In this context, and just simply for us, living a life that follows God. Living a life that follows God is living a holy life. 1 Peter 1:16 is a good example of this. God simply calls us to be holy, for I am holy. God says that to us, to be holy, for I am holy. He gives it no extra reasoning other than, hey, I'm this, and I want you to be like this. I want you to follow me to this. But here's the crazy thing. Daniel was living such a dope, dynamic, in verse 3 it even says distinguished. It said he had so distinguished himself. Like dope, dynamic, distinguished life that it both made people love and hate him. It made people love and hate him. Like if you look at the king was like all about Daniel. The king was like, "Listen, dude, you be killing it out here. You're like a hard worker. You know a lot of like really good stuff. In fact, you know way more than all these other governors and people and yada yada. So I'm going to put you up here." But what did it do to the people underneath him? They became to literally like hate him. And I think what we can pull from this is a truth that when you follow Yahweh, when you follow God, and not the culture, or not your friends, or not the people around you doing whatever it may be, people are going to notice. Because you're different. You're acting in ways because maybe you read this book, or maybe because you have good friends, or maybe because you come to Awaken, or you go to a church on a Sunday and you hear some good stuff that God's telling you to do, so you start walking in that, but it's different than what everyone else is doing. Because can we be real? The culture right now is a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of the same things. Whatever everybody else is doing, that's the easiest way out. That's what's going to make me look the best, so I'm just going to do that. But when we don't live like that, when we push toward this idea of following God, this idea of holiness, we look different. And some people are going to jump on board with that, and some people are going to try to sink the ship. Some people are going to jump on board with you and think what you're doing is awesome because you're different and you're affecting and impacting people and you're standing out, but some people are going to hate it. And they're going to try to sink the ship. The king and the administrators are a really good example of this. But I think there's two reasons that we can pull from this passage as to why holiness brings haters. The first one, actually I have both of them up here, but the first one is envy. They wanted what Daniel had badly. They wanted where he had gotten and the things he was doing and how he was doing them, so they went after him. There's just an understanding we have to have that hopefully this will equip you tonight, meaning if you are trying to do this. And I love that some of my little bros and sisters in here do this. I love that some of you are out in your schools really living this or really trying, and in your families trying to make a difference, in your circles trying to make a difference. And I hope this can equip and encourage you to do it even better. But the first thing is envy. People are going to come after you if you really live out this faith because they're going to envy what God is doing for you and in you. They're going to envy the peace that you have. They're going to envy the joy that you have. They're going to envy the positions God's going to put you in because we say all the time, you have purpose. You have deeply rooted purpose because God put you here on purpose. And as we begin to figure that purpose out and see who God made us to be, we start to walk in that purpose and we start to impact people. And there are going to be people that hate that. There are going to be people who envy what you're doing and what you have, but you know it's been given by God. They're going to envy the boldness that you have, the courage that you have to be different. They're going to envy those things. But the really cool thing about when people start to envy what God's doing in your life is that is such a prime opportunity to point them where it came from. To point them, hey, look, this has nothing to do with me, and I get it. You're jelly over there because God's doing his thing, because faithfulness leads to favor, and God's working up in me, and I'm just happy as all get out, or God really blessed me in this area, or I'm really impacting over here because of God in my life. But you can point straight back to God, and they're going to be like, wow. But the second reason I think holiness is going to lead to hate, and what I want to focus on a little bit more is comfortable sin. One of the biggest reasons you trying to live out a godly life, and let's be real, like this isn't as complex as I think we make it sometimes when we say things like, live holy or live a godly life. That just means, when your friends are all doing X and you shouldn't be, you're just like, that's not for me. It's as simple as that. Saying no when everybody else says yes. Saying no when it's easy, when you know the right answer is hard. It's as simple as that. But here's the crazy thing, that your beliefs and the way you live are going to make them hate. But what you need to see about that is they're going to then start paying attention to what you believe. Because they're going to look at your actions and look at your life in the same way that these governors looked at Daniel's. And it says right here in verse 5, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Have any of you been in a situation where you call yourself a Christian and the first thing people will do, well, shouldn't you be doing this then? But if you're Christian, aren't you supposed to live like this? And they might know nothing about Christianity. They might have never stepped foot in the church. But they'd be like, yeah, but Christians shouldn't do that, right? But don't you guys hate gay people? Ever heard that? By the way, the answer is no, a hard no. But they pull these things out against your faith because they know that's going to hit. But here's why they do that, comfortable sin. Because when you start living a godly life, let me tell you something crazy. Your godliness, your impact, this aura you're literally like letting off of you because of what God's doing in and through you, it starts to rub against the sin in their life. And what that looks like is you get in your circles, and maybe for gentlemen, your friends are talking about women a certain way, looking at ladies a certain way, and you're just the one that's like, man, we got to respect women, guys. Like, that could be your sister. That could be your mom. That could be whatever. Like, we have to respect. Do you know that they're made in the image of God too? And all of a sudden, those guys in your circle are like, wait, what? And you're starting to rub up against their comfortable sin. Or for ladies, maybe, when you're in your circles, and it's so superficial, and it's so much about how you look and how you like can just like show up looking nice for the gram and stuff like that. And you're just like, God made me perfect the way I am. I don't need that. Do you know who God says you are? And they're like, wait, what? And you start to rub up against their comfortable sin, the things that they have just gotten used to in a culture that doesn't really pay much attention to God. And you are just in such a good way going to start to cause friction in your circles because the way you live is so against what the culture is doing. Daniel was doing this. He was in a non-Jewish culture, but he was following the only true God. And he started to just live a certain way, and he was so excellent that next thing you know, he's in charge of everybody. And these people are envying him and realizing, well, wait a second, he stands against everything we believe. And it starts to just rub against their uncomfortable sin. And when that happens, they start to target you. But we talked about this at Revive, that where do we fight from? Where do we fight from? We got the victory, we said. We said if we got God on our side, if Jesus came down and did what he said and he died for us and rose up 3 days later and said, guess what? If you believe in me, you've got all of this given to you. We walk into every situation with a big old W on our head. And in the same exact way, we can walk into situations boldly and confidently, doing what God has for us rather than what everyone else is doing. And when people start to get a little angsty about that, or a little angry at you about that, or maybe they don't really like the things that you're saying or standing for or doing, and I hope you know people like this in your circles. In fact, I hope they're you. But I know when I see people that live this way, they stick out like a sore thumb, and it's beautiful. I can look at them and be like, you are so different from everybody else. You do things so different than everybody else. You do them so much better than everybody else. You follow God in such a way that I can't help but want what you have. Do you know anybody like that? Daniel was this guy. But Daniel was so close with God that what he understood was so groundbreaking. He understood this friction was good. This friction of rubbing up against people's comfortable sin and just the way that the culture does things just because of how impactfully he was living was a good thing. And here's why. Because when you start to rub up against those things because you're living so faithfully and you're following God as best as you possibly can and not looking to what other people are doing, but to what God says, the reality is people, whether or not they hate on you, they will get to a breaking point. Because as you rub up against that stuff and then that they're starting to notice, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe he or she's got a point that there is a way we should be living. And maybe there is this God who's got way more for us. And all of a sudden they get to a breaking point where they have two options. Their options are this: to either walk out of your life or walk into a relationship with Jesus. We have the opportunity and the impact to just live a life. Not even necessarily say any words with it, but to live a life so different that people around you are going to have two options, and one of them is not to stay the same. I want to live that type of life. I want to be the type of person that if you hang out with me daily, give it a week, you got a decision to make. Because God is extremely real, and you can either walk away from it or walk right into his open, loving arms. Daniel lived this type of life. And we see it reflected in how the people responded to him. Following Yahweh and not Yahweh, their way, it will bring these types of dynamics into your life. Just know that. But also know that if we're prepared for it, we know it's a good thing. We know it's going to yield results. And we can say, bring on the haters. Turn to your neighbor and say, bring on the haters. My next point comes from verse 10. I'm going to read it to you. Verse 10 says this. Now, when Daniel learned that, this is crazy, y'all. Can you just listen to this real quick? This man, I feel like was certifiably insane, but he just loved Jesus a lot. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published to not pray to any person or any god for 30 days other than this king, or you'd get thrown into a lion's den. That was the decree. It wasn't like, fill out these forms and maybe you can get out of it. No. If you have a legal ID, then you'll be good. No. It was, you know what I'm saying? There was no fighting back. It was like, don't do it. And you're okay. Anyways, here's what it says. When Daniel learned this decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room. It doesn't say he paused either. It wasn't like, I really contemplated what I was going to do. It says, he went home to his upstairs room with the windows open towards Jerusalem. Why is that important? Because that means it opened towards where the law had just been made. All the people that were supposed to be following this law, he had these big old bay windows that had motorized remotes to open the windows. That wasn't there. But it opened towards Jerusalem. That's why that's important, okay? 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. My second point is this: consistent praise is always better than cultural patterns. Consistent praise is always better than cultural patterns. Honestly, I think I studied all through Daniel before we went into this series or whatever, and I think that verse stuck out to me more than anything in the whole book, because this basically was okay, I'm going to paraphrase it, 2019 version. Dog, don't pray to him or you're going to get thrown in a den where hungry cats are going to tear you up. By the way, these cats are 400 pounds and they haven't eaten for a month, okay? So just please don't pray to God. You're a God, okay? Don't do it. And then Daniel was like, I eat motorized windows. God, You're awesome. I love you. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because you the dopest. Like that's, okay, that's not exactly how it went, but it's pretty close. You know what I'm saying? The Phil's paraphrase version 2019. It's not, you don't want that version. It's not for sale, okay? But that blows my mind, that level of faithfulness. With that in your face, that's what he chose to do. Like, think about the things you've struggled with. Think about the things you've gone through. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more at the end. Have we been that faithful to what God's told us to do? Have we trusted God that much, even in the face of something that severe, that he went right back to what God had been telling him to do? I know I look at that and the answer is no. The answer is no, because there's times where it's just so hard, or there's times where the stuff getting in the way just seems really big or really scary, and the funny thing is it's not near getting thrown into a vicious kitty den. But sometimes I'm not faithful still, and I still don't walk in what I know God has for me. But it's consistent praise, as Daniel shows us here, is just always better than cultural patterns. Think about the context. We've talked a lot about context here, meaning like what's going on in these stories. Nebuchadnezzar, who's like the bunny king, the chocolate bunny king, where my VeggieTales people at, he's the chocolate bunny king, but he's the king of this actual real place, and he was like kind of, brutal in a lot of ways. He'd kill people who didn't, and they had just exiled like all of Judea, all of Daniel's people, took them all over because they're just boss, and that's what they do. He wrote this decree, and if we look back, we talked in chapter 1 about how, actually in chapter 3, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Tyler taught this, got chucked into the fire, right? And then those 3 dudes came out, and they weren't even hot. You know what I'm saying? We don't know what they looked like, but physically, like their temperatures were not raised. The fire had not affected them. And what did Nebuchadnezzar do then? He changed the law. He was like, yo, y'all's God must be like kind of crazy because I just watched you walk out of a fire and you're not dead. And it was a really hot fire, and there was another guy in there with you, and I'm pretty sure it was Jesus. They didn't know Jesus then, but it was. Looked like the Son of Man. And they changed it. And then a new king comes in. So we're at the point now in Daniel 6 where a new king, Darius, has come in. We don't like people named Darius. We got one person named Darius in here. Okay. A new king comes in and all of a sudden switches all the laws up. Now you can't pray to certain people. You got to do things certain ways. But does that not sound like our culture? You got a trend that's bumping and got 10 bajillions of views. You got that personality on YouTube or whatever, and you watch them, and next thing you know, they disappear off the face of the planet. There's always a new trend. There's always that new thing that's cool. There's always that new person to follow, and then give it a month, give it a year, give it a couple years. They're washed up, and there's somebody new. There's something new we should be doing. There's a new way we should look, a new way we should act. And this was no different then. And Daniel, even amidst a constantly shifting culture, which we still experience today, was so faithful to follow Yahweh, to follow God. I think that there's so many things that the culture, that people turn to when we're faced with issues that let us down over and over and over and over and over. We turn to temporary solutions looking for permanent answers, and they're not there. But in fact, these temporary solutions just make our problems grow, and those temporary solutions just numb us or hide us from those things until we have to do it again. Whether that's an addiction, whether that's a substance, whether that's a person, whether that's a place that you go. And it just kind of distracts you from what's really going on when God's saying, no, there's better ways to handle it. The culture often teaches us to take the easy way out. It says to run from your problems. It says to avoid those hard things because, just be you. Don't let the haters hate. Don't let them get you down, which aren't even bad things but in that context they can be, because God has things for us to do and ways for us to act. But God so often is so different from the culture, right? And he says that good things in life are hard, so face it. Deal with it. Walk in it. Get in the mud, but let me come with you, because when you get through the mud, there's so much better on the other side. But if all you ever do is run from it, you're never going to get there. You're never going to deal with those problems. You're never going to deal with those things. They're always going to be buried down under the surface, nagging at you, trying to come back up. Daniel is such a good example of this because he heard this law that literally would get him tossed into a hungry kitty den. and he went right back to what he had always been doing. I think something of note is that your praise won't mean that there won't be persecution. I think sometimes I do this. I'm following God, and I'm like, okay, Jesus, I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm trying to do what you say in this book and what people around me, are speaking into me or whatever. And then some crap goes down. I like the phrase, the crap hits the fan, because what happens when crap hits a fan? Awaken game next week? We don't have any fans. I'll get one and point it this way and siphon it through. When the crap hits the fan, I tend to be like, God, I was faithful. Why is this happening? Why aren't things like just golden dandelions in a giant field that I can just walk through and majestically go like this? But we need to understand that praise doesn't necessarily mean there won't be persecution. In fact, this brings us back to week 1, right? We said faithfulness leads to favor, but we said sometimes favor of God on you is persecution. Because he knows the only way you'll grow, the only way you'll be bold, the only way you'll step up is if I put you through some stuff. And that's actually God's favor on you. So we look at Daniel here, and just like John 15:18 says, when the world hates you, when the world hates you, remember that it first hated me. Daniel was just trusting God, and it says that my man got chucked into the lion's den. He got dumped up in there. He was being faithful, and it brought persecution. But Daniel understood something that we sometimes don't, that I sometimes don't, that regardless of what happens to us here, consistent praise is always better than cultural patterns. And I want to ask you guys something. When things aren't going well, or when stuff is hard, or when you feel lost or confused, what do you run to? Identify that thing that is just what you always go to numb problems. Sometimes it's a screen, and we just scroll until we feel better or forget our problems. Sometimes it's, like we said, a substance. Sometimes it's those people that you know you shouldn't be around, but they just distract you enough until your problems seem to go away. Whatever it may be for you, I want to challenge us with this. Adversity uncovers our true allegiance. Meaning, if we claim that God, like this God is who we want to follow, and I hope that we think that, and I hope you know how worth it is and how good he is and how much of a better life you're going to have following him. But when adversity comes, where we go shows who we're truly allegiant to. And I think at times I claim, well, I really believe in this thing and I really want to walk these things out, but when the metaphorical crap hits the fan, sometimes I don't turn to God. Sometimes I don't go right back to the place where I had always gone like Daniel did. So what about you? And can I challenge and encourage us as a family, because this is family stuff right here, that can we be people who in the face of adversity make it our default to run to God? Make it our default to run to the only person who really has the answers. Because so often when the storms come, it's when we're the most tempted to run away, the most tempted to turn to bad things, to doubt God's goodness. But Daniel, our example in this instance, said no. Even though the culture is telling me this, God, I know you have not failed me once and you won't start now. You delivered me once before and you can do it again, so I'm going to trust you. Can we be people who live that way? Imagine how differently you would live with that type of mindset. We constantly tell you guys that you're made for impact, but can you just look at the influence and impact that Daniel's consistent praise had? What does it say the king did when he threw him into the lion's den? My man freaked out. He was like, no, I really liked you, and you've been awesome. And it says he didn't eat. He didn't get any entertainment. We don't know what that means. I have some assumptions, but we're not going to go there. And he didn't sleep. Who likes all those things? Me. I like all those things. If you don't, you're weird. And he couldn't do any of them because Daniel had impacted him so deeply just by the way he lived. Just by the way he lived. Could we be people that we stay consistent in our praise, understanding that even if we don't immediately see it, it will impact people? Consistent praise impacts people. Turn to your neighbor and say, praise impacts people. And then my last section comes out of verse 24. So check this out with me. This is the end of the passage that we read. So at this point, my man Daniel got up out of that joint and had no scratches on him, and the kitty's mouse had been pinched by an angel. That's what this says, okay? I'm just reading it. We believe this. because it's awesome. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Notice Daniel had gotten thrown in and survived a whole night. These people didn't even make it to the floor. That's some of the favor that God has on us. But my last point that we have to understand in being effective people and impactful people and following God and not the culture is this: justice is brought by the judge, not you. Justice is brought by the judge, not you. So in this instance, what justice looked like, and justice looks different in different situations, we'll talk about that briefly. But in this instance, Daniel didn't leave it up to himself to defend himself. In fact, it doesn't really say that he said anything before getting chucked in. It just said that he broke the law. The suck-up governors were like, hey, go get Daniel. And the king couldn't sleep or eat or get entertainment. And then they were like, all right, throw him in. So they chucked him in, and that was it. And they closed it and said, like, I hope you live, Daniel. Pretty much how that went. He didn't defend himself at any point in time. The next morning, he gets brought out untouched. The accusers, the people who had actually done the wrong, got thrown in, and they were overpowered before they even touched the ground. I think we need to understand at times that things that God wants us to walk through by being consistent in our praise are things that would overpower other people in a second. But with God on your side, we fight from the victory, and we can walk through things untouched at times when other people would be crushed immediately. That's the offer on the table for us. But we need to know justice is brought by the judge, because so often, this is huge. Just listen. Every person, leader, everybody in this room, listen to this. So often we get paralyzed by our opinions of something, how we think we were wronged, or we think others should be doing something, or maybe they're doing something incorrectly, or we feel God should have handled a situation a certain way because it didn't go how we mapped it out in our head. But when we live like that and we have those mentalities, we say that, God, we don't trust that you've got it. God, we don't trust that you're a God of justice, and we don't trust that you're going to take care of this. And I just want to challenge myself that type of living is both a disrespect to God, but it also paralyzes our effectiveness and our impact here on this earth. Most of us wouldn't say we live like that. If I were to ask for a raise of hands and be like, okay, guys, how many of you don't trust at all that God's going to handle your situations? Most of you, and some of you might be honest and throw your hands in there, and good for you if that's really where you're at, but most of us would be like, no, I do. I think God's got this handled. I think he's got it under control. But our actions and relationships with others are going to tell the real story. How we interact with others and how we treat other people and how we live our life is what's going to tell that story. Because when we spend tons of time complaining, any complainers in the house? When we spend tons of time finger pointing, you did it. It was your fault. You did this to me. You're why I feel this certain way. When we live in self-pity, oh, woe is me. When we're in constant friction and turmoil with others. When we just always are butting heads with somebody. Always. We probably fit this mold. And we probably, and not probably, we do in this sense, render ourselves ineffective. Because when we live this way and we say, I don't trust that you've got this under control, God, we can't live the way Daniel did. Because we would have defended ourselves. And we would have started arguing and been like, well, yeah, but it should be this way. And I think it should go this way. And this is how things should play out. What the heck, God? And he's like, well, because you're doubting me, you're not going to ever get to the other side of that doubt. You're not ever going to get to what I have for you over there because you aren't willing to trust me through this. You aren't willing to trust me through the storm. You aren't willing to trust me through the muck. But some of us fit this mold and we don't even realize it. When we waste our own time, actually, that's what we're doing. We're wasting our own time, that God wants us to be changing the world, because that type of mentality, the type of mentality that it's how I want it to be and it's my opinion about everything and yada, yada, yada. It breaks down relationships. It cultivates bitterness and resentment. It builds up pride of thinking we're always right and things needing to be our own way. And a lot of times we don't even intentionally do this, but think about how that might be a part of what you walk through. If there are people or places in your life constantly riddled with conflict and issues and headbutting, you have to see that it may be due to you having a lack of this. A lack of trusting that whether now or at the end, God is going to handle what you're walking through. So how did Daniel stand so firm? I love this. He was aware of his impact and assured of God's goodness. That's how he did it. None of us are ever going to be threatened to get thrown in a lion's den. And if you do, I want to know how that happened. I want to know the situation. I want you to detail it to me because that's crazy. That's probably not going to happen to you. Meaning we're going to suffer with things that are real and are really going to happen and we're really going to feel it, but it probably won't be this level of persecution, especially over here in America, like land of the free. God bless America. Love it. Daniel did it because he was aware of his impact and assured of God's goodness. He knew by trusting God and not being the complainer, not being the finger pointer, not being the whatever, by just trusting God, he was going to have such deep impact on the people around him, and he was assured that whether or not I get delivered from this lion's den, you are so good, God. Your goodness has nothing to do with whether I'm kiddie food tonight. Can I tell you that God's goodness has nothing to do with some of the sucky stuff you're dealing with? God's goodness has nothing to do with some of the crap I've walked through. But in fact, God's goodness is right there to grab onto when I'm in the sucky stuff because he stays good even when my situations are bad. And we can trust that if we believe that God is a just God and he's going to handle the situations the way that they should be handled. And the last part of that was that when Daniel lived that way, it freed him. We've been talking a lot about freedom, have we not? Our year theme is being free. I think a lot of you have walked in some level of that this year already, which is amazing. This type of mindset freed Daniel to devote his life to God. And are you walking in that? Or are different people, different situations, different relationships, things that you aren't satisfied with holding you back from this level of devotion and freedom? And if so, you need to ask God to help you trust him, that he has the final word, and that final word is exactly how it should be, because justice is brought by the judge, not us. So I want to do something tonight. We have what I like to call family moments here. We've had a few of them, and I just love how God moves through them. But I want to have a family moment tonight where I'm just going to jump down here, and maybe you relate to something. Maybe you relate to a level of where Daniel was at tonight. And I'm going to talk through a couple of them, and if you do, in any way, shape, or form, feel challenged that God might be calling you to step up, maybe it looks like you need to praise more consistently when the culture or your friends or whatever are telling you to do X, because you know when you finally do, it'll impact. Or maybe you know that you need to live a more godly life because holiness is going to bring opposition, but that's exactly why you're scared to do it. Because you know if you follow some of the things that God has for you, it's going to bring opposition into your life, and that's hard, and maybe you're stuck there. Maybe you just really struggle to trust that God's going to handle your situations. You're in some sucky stuff right now, and you're thinking, God, how can this be? How are you good if this is happening? And maybe tonight he's challenging you. You have to trust me. You have to trust me that I'm going to handle it, whether it's now or in a year or when you come up to meet me in heaven and I handle it fully and completely then. You need to trust me. Maybe you're there. If you're in any of those boats, I just want you to pop up and come up. We're going to have a family moment and pray. Don't worry about anybody else around you, but if that's where you're at, come on up. But maybe, if while you're thinking about those, maybe you're missing it completely. Maybe you look at these things that Daniel exemplified and you realize